Greetings everybody and welcome, it's Rob from Sage Tower Games, and today I'm bringing you guys one of my new type of videos I want to bring to the channel. That is just book reviews. Now, not normal books, I'm talking about tabletop books, be it either adventure path books or actual content books. So for this one, I'm going to start off with the actual campaign that I do run on Sunday evenings, Age of Ashes, the Pathfinder 2nd Edition campaign. And I'm going to start off with book 1, entitled Hellknight Hill, written by Amanda Heyman. Now, this book obviously has some big significance to it because it's the first adventure path book that was released for Pathfinder 2, so it's kind of like the first time someone gets to actually run an actual adventure path in this series. Yeah, we had like Fall of Plaguestone, I think came out before this, and the playtest stuff, but this is the first like actual material content that we had to run. And I did run this myself. Some of these things I will admit it's me on my theory craft other books, but this book I did run myself. And I do have to say, I enjoyed this book, running it and just reading through it. I will try and minimize major spoilers in terms of plot points and stuff like that. However, I will possibly mention some detail that might, if you are possibly, playing it, or maybe thinking about playing it and don't want the story ruined, it might be a bit wary. Heads up on that. Now, I like the way the book starts in terms of the first chapter, in terms of like what the party has to do to kind of come together and help the town. It's a lot different than the standard meet in a tavern. And it's a lot different than, or just like twist on the festival motif. I feel like there have been a few adventures in the past where there's always been like a party or a festival and then something bad happens. This one takes it a bit of a different way. So with that, I think it's a good way. It's a unique way. It's what when I first saw this book, before I even ran this campaign, I thought that sounds like that could be a lot of fun, just watching the party try and figure out how to do that. And sure enough, it was. The rest of it is also pretty solid. You go into various dungeon crawls, obviously with the title location Hellknight Hill being a much of a pretty much focus for the rest of the book. And the dungeon there is fine. The dungeon I feel like aren't too overbearing. There are some times where books will give you a super dungeon that at other levels it's too much for the party to really handle in one go, and then the party has to rest. But depending on where the dungeon is, they may not just be able to leave and rest. So then you kind of have to hold the whole like, well, if they rest, what does the rest of the enemies in the dungeon do while they're resting? And for people who may be new to DMing or new to Pathfinder, they may not want to deal with that. So I'm glad that none of the dungeons seemed overly long. Some good, unique enemies, some classic enemies are also in here. Can't go wrong with some of the classics. And that got a nice mix of keeping it with the fresh and the enemies that people know is a nice touch. The one con I will have to say, gameplay wise, I don't feel like any of the signature battles or like the battles against the quote unquote villains in this book were really that climactic in terms of like a cinematic feel. Even the one against the culprit that you think is behind everything is really not that great of a fight, because I feel like low level spellcaster fights are kind of not that exciting because you don't have access to a lot of spells, like as opposed to like a high level spellcaster that will actually have enough time for like defenses and stuff. And then even the last battle it's an okay battle. Obviously, my party, I've talked about it a few times. It was a pretty much intense only because my party rolled really bad on some saves that put them in that position. Otherwise, the battle's not that great. I will admit the location of the battle is a bit weird. Most of the enemies like that you would use, kind of the minions, if you will, aren't exactly worth their weight in gold. They're just essentially bodies to just block for the most part. I don't feel like there are any really threats except for the main antagonist, if you will, in that book, who isn't really a main antagonist because he doesn't really thwart anything. But overall, neither of those battles that I feel like would really grab me. In terms of NPCs, we do get a Hellknight Armiger, which is kind of a cool NPC. He's like a lot of fun to play. He gets like a GM NPC kind of, which depending on how well the party treats him, can kind of go on for quite a bit. And overall, is a pretty cool character. You can play him up. He has a very like sarcastic, bravado type feel to him. And I think he was a lot of fun to play and to use. The party really kind of dug him when he started, power attacking and just doing tons of damage. They enjoyed having him in the group. However, the other NPC that we get later on in the book, I'm just going to call her Renali. Not talking much about her except for the fact that I feel like she doesn't really have much of a purpose in this book, and she has some in the next book, but not that much. My main issue with her is the fact that her spell list is pretty weak, and even though I understand where they were going with her spell list and the kind of spells available to her, I feel like that they weren't exactly great. They weren't, nothing about the spell list really jumped out at me. So with that, the other thing I also like about the book is it doesn't have much in terms of the, well, I like to call the loose end town social encounters. A lot of times in these adventure paths, they will give you a series of events that's supposed to happen. And depending on what the party goes to investigate or what the party does, and when they kind of do a bunch of them, they kind of eventually figure out where they have to go. They didn't do it in this one. They do it in a few of the other ones. I will say that. And while it's not that much of a big deal, the issue I have with it is that for the first book, when the party's still kind of getting together, learning, you kind of, to give them this whole freedom to do what they want, but they don't really know what they need to be doing, can be confusing sometimes. When you kind of don't give them a clear direction for what they're trying to go for. And also then you have to try and figure out, because I feel like a lot of these events, they almost want to make it sound like that the party is doing them on like separate days, and like time becomes a bit of a wibbly wobbly mess because it makes it sound like that they can't do these 2-3 events at the same time, but then they can, because some of them are just social encounters with a few, diplomacy rolls and a few moments of roleplay. So it's not that much big of a deal. Luckily, this book did not do that. The last thing I will mention about this book, and I will just flip to it for myself, is going to the book does have some beautiful art. The maps are also fine as well. Nothing wrong with that. I will say there is some art errors in this book, but that is mostly due to the book having to be released at the same time they released second edition, and because of that, they obviously didn't have time to possibly proofread. The authors had to kind of work on the stuff at the same time that the writer was writing it and they were planning it out. So I can understand there being a bit of a disconnect here and there. Other than that, it's a great book. I highly recommend this as a book to at least try, even if you're not going to run the full adventure path. You have a decent amount of chunk here, and you can actually, if you really wanted to, even just run this first book and then diverge from the rest of the campaign and make your own campaign with how this book ends and spin off into your own whole different storyline. It's possible, which is really cool actually. So I think this is a good book. I do recommend it. If any of you guys have played it or ran it, let me know in the comments. And be sure to check out my future reviews for the rest of the Age of Ashes book reviews. Thank you for watching.